I often see people's relationships kind of crumble or not succeed because they fail at this like very integral and simple task.
You give a lot of advice on dating, and I literally just saw you on the Tamron Hall show. Iconic. We're all, swiping on Instagram, TikTok, and seeing like the ideal relationships. Like, I want a man who's flying me out and this, that, and the third, which is great. Get your bag. But at the same time, not every connection on like Tinder or Hinge is gonna get you there.
Oh, I want to go back to what dating was. I'm like, do you? Like, I don't really think you do want to go back to what dating
Right.
was. But I think what we're asking for is like a hybrid, a new kind of dating, which is, people are open to having discussions and like it's sometimes as simple as taking people and putting them in a place knowing they can talk to each other.
Hi everyone, you're listening to Transplants, the podcast for 20-somethings moving to a new city and trying to navigate all the trials and tribulations that come with it. I'm your host Joyce, and today we're going to be talking about dating in a new city with a very special guest, Ariana Nathani. A little bit about Ariana: she was on the Forbes 30 Under 30 media list for 2024 and is the founder of Drinks First, a media and events company that started as a New York-based dating podcast in which she interviews anonymous, eligible, and single New Yorkers. People in the city who are interested in these guests can reach out to them to connect. Drinks First has grown into a community of over 90,000 followers with more than 1 million TikTok likes. The podcast is now signed with SiriusXM and has charted in over 40 countries. Since 2021, Drinks First has hosted events with up to 2,000 attendees in New York City at beautiful venues like Ludlow House and partnered with companies including Bumble. Drinks First also connects with its audience through a newsletter with over 15,000 subscribers, and the podcast ranks among the top 10% most shared on Spotify. Now, I don't live in New York, but I discovered Drinks First, I think, a year or two ago, and I just thought it was such a cool idea to interview people anonymously and use that as a platform to form new connections, and seeing the growth that Drinks First has had over the past couple of years with hosting in-person events in New York has been truly, truly inspiring. And also, hello, Ariana was on the Forbes 30 Under 30 list, and that's where I'm trying to be, okay? So I'm very excited to bring this conversation to you today. We're talking about dating in a new city, modern dating, Ariana's take as being, New York's matchmaker. With Valentine's Day around the corner, I think this is such a timely conversation to have. And without further ado, let's get into it. Welcome to the show, Ariana. So excited to have you here today. To kick us off, I would love for you to do an intro about who you are, where you're from, what you do, and what you're passionate about.
Sure. So my name is Ariana Nathani. I am from New York City. I currently live here now, and I am the founder of Drinks First, which is a media and events company that is centered around dating and meeting new people. And what am I passionate about? Honestly, food, restaurants, bars, hospitality, and travel.
How did Drinks First come about? Because I discovered your podcast and your platform through TikTok, but how did the idea for starting that podcast come about and what it's evolved to today?
Yeah, so I started Drinks First back in 2019. So it's been about 5.5 years, which is actually insane to say. The idea came from conversations that I was having with my friends. I grew up in New York City. I moved back after college, and I felt like the conversations were super similar about dating, where people were really frustrated. They felt like there was no accountability. People felt like they were a product. So there was just a lot of frustrations around the current channels of dating. And at the time, I was listening to a lot of podcasts. It was like peak Call Her Daddy era. And I loved Call Her Daddy. It was like a very entertaining podcast, but I didn't think that it spoke really to who I was as a person and my lived experience. So all of those ideas kind of coalesced into what Drinks First has become today, which is I interview anonymous singles who are based in New York City, and my listeners can match with them. So I wanted to create a solution to the problem that I was hearing people, wax poetic about, which is dating's really hard and I don't like the apps. And so it's not a perfect solution, but I thought it was something different and a different channel that people could connect through, and also a way that I could highlight stories of all sorts of people. people, whether they are people of color, they are LGBTQ plus, they are divorced or older, or just navigating life in a way that I didn't see represented in media at the time.
Yeah, love that. I definitely remember the era of Call Her Daddy being like the huge thing. And I was like, love that, but also, comma, what about me?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I really also love the idea that you interview people anonymously. Was that a very specific choice that you made? Can you talk a little bit about
Definitely.
that?
Yeah, so I did feel like there was, with dating apps, they're incredibly gamified, and
Hmm.
you can make a decision on somebody in less than 30 seconds.
Yeah.
Yes or no, I'm not interested in this person. And that is not how attraction works in real life.
Yeah.
And so I felt really strongly about trying to figure out a way that felt a little more holistic in how we discuss people and how they present themselves, just to create like a slightly more even playing field.
Hmm. I love that. That's so true. Even thinking about when I was back on the apps, I know my friends would go on my profile and be like, "Oh, this angle of the selfie is weird. Next." It was very like cut and dry. So I love that approach and how you've taken that with Drinks First. But you have been coined as New York City's like dating guru. So I'd love to pick your brain about modern dating because there's been a lot of interesting discourse online about like 50-50 and the things that we don't really love. um but would love to get your take on dating as we know it today, especially for like people in their 20s and 30s. But what has been the most surprising thing that you learned about modern dating through building Drinks First and hosting these events?
I mean, I think I had a lot of hypotheses that came correct. Um, it's not rocket science. And it doesn't need to be. The way that a lot of people discuss dating, modern dating, we get into the nuances of all of these little problems, but they're on a whole, I think the most important thing I've learned, and it's not going to come as a surprise to anyone, is in any relationship, communication is the most important thing.
Yeah.
Whether that means you're communicating about not liking each other, or you're communicating about, how you expect to be treated, or what your expectations are. It is so important to communicate with somebody who might be a potential partner, or even a friend, or even a family member. And I often see people's relationships kind of crumble or not succeed because they fail at this like very integral and simple task. Other things I think I knew that was just going to be like that I thought, but then I was validated in was, for example, I knew that people were going to be really tired of dating apps. And that was back in 2019. And here we are in 2025, and the sentiment has only gotten worse. Obviously, we went through a global pandemic and everybody was forced online. And I think that was really what has extended the life of dating apps and had made them somewhat complacent on how they, try and engage with their consumer base, because they became the standard for how people date now.
Yeah.
But it doesn't have to be that way. And so I knew from a long time ago that people wanted a different way to meet, and that people were really going to say, I wish it was kind of like the good old days, or I wish that we could like meet in person. And everybody wants that feeling. Even as apps have become more normalized, people
Hmm.
want to feel like they're having that quote unquote meet cute. And
Yeah.
so that is something that I had an inkling about years ago and I think has come
Hmm.
true. And that's partially why Drinks First has been so successful.
Yeah, definitely. I 100% agree. I think especially like with the pandemic, people are definitely craving that in-person connection, that in those in-person relationships, which I think can be really difficult, especially when you move to a new city, which is what this whole show is about, and you don't really know anyone and you're just trying to like make these connections. What advice would you have for people who are kind of entering that dating space in a new territory? It's very unfamiliar and they're just trying to navigate it.
It's different for every kind of person. It like depends on what your comfort level is, what you're really looking for. Um, you know, if you're dipping your toe in the water, and especially dating in a new city, I think dating's a really great tool to get to know a city.
Yeah.
Um, I grew up in New York, so New York was never really a new city to me.
Gotcha.
But I have lived in other places in my life, and I have found that being single and dating was a really great way and a really great gateway into getting to know a city. People are more willing and more likely to talk to you if you are single and if you are
Yeah.
dating. I years ago I've used dating apps like as when I moved to a new city, like I lived in Barcelona for a bit. I used dating apps to
Yeah.
meet people. I didn't know anybody there. And there is just a willingness around the fact that like somebody would take time out of their day to meet you and kind of show you around if romance is potentially on the table.
Yeah.
So in my best possible way, I think like being open to those sorts of connections that might, for the most part, develop into something that could be a friendship.
Yeah.
Most of the time you meet somebody off of an app, it doesn't necessarily mean that person's going to be your like boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, whatever. But
Yeah.
it could just be a relationship in which you meet somebody, and then I think the best way to like meet people in a new city is like you find one point person that you really get along with, and then you meet all of their friends, and then you just
Yeah.
keep like meeting people from there.
I love what you said about going on dates that might not lead to like romantic connections. And I feel like a lot of people don't necessarily keep that in mind when they're swiping on the apps and like going on dates. Like it's great to, have a goal in mind when you're like going into something, but at the same time, I feel like a lot of people don't leave room for chance and what could become, whether it's a romantic connection or like a platonic connection, especially knowing that we're all, swiping on Instagram, TikTok, and seeing like the ideal relationships. Like, I want a man who's flying me out and this, that, and the third, which is great, get your bag. But at the same time, not every connection on like Tinder or Hinge is gonna get you there. So I think, like you said, it's definitely important to keep in mind that connections can evolve into something that is different than what you first intended.
Totally. And if you like the person enough, maybe they have friends.
Exactly. Exactly. Which ties into what I wanted to ask you about community. Because, like you mentioned, a lot of people want the in person dating, the in person meet cute, which, is definitely ideal. We want that romantic movie scene. But that's not necessarily the case for a lot of people. But the way that can manifest for people is through their community, so connecting with someone's brother or someone's sister, things like that. And you're cultivating community in a very unique way through Drinks First, and it's not necessarily like family and loved ones, but people are coming together for this common thing, and that can grow into a romantic connection or a platonic connection. And I think community is just something that really shines through in what you've built with Drinks First. So I wanted to ask you, why do you think dating through community and like in person things is better than dating apps?
Yeah, I think especially since COVID, people are really searching for that quote unquote third place.
Yeah.
And we interact less with people on our day to day. Like, less people are going into the office 5 days a week, less
Yeah.
people are going to school like 5 days a week. Are the way that we typically socialized has shifted a
Yeah.
ton in the last 5 years. And so I think there's this importance on community, and we see it. It's such a buzzword. We hear it, we see it all the time. And it's like, what does that really mean?
Mm-hmm.
And to me, it has really been like people who align with like a similar set of interests or moral values or something like that. And the idea of Drinks First, where it's like, I would really like to meet people outside of, the online sphere. I would really like to meet someone in like an alternative way, whether that person's a friend or they are a romantic partner.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, like, I am willing to put myself in a situation to meet somebody like that is what attracts certain people to Drinks First. And I think And the way that I describe like a drinks first event is that and you are going knowing that there is social permission. Like you have the social permission to go up and talk to somebody, and more likely than not, they will reciprocate that conversation with you because that
Mhm.
is what they are also there for.
Yeah.
So that's what community means to me. It's like all of these people who are coming together around a similar set of interests, and that is like the core way to date. That's the way that people dated like pre-dating apps. Like,
Mhm.
oh, maybe I met somebody at a bar, or I met somebody at the gym, or at a tennis class, or
Yeah.
and I think a lot of people are searching for that similar shared interest because that's where they think they'll find people who are the most like-minded. For example, run clubs. Like they
Right.
really had their moment, right?
Exactly.
Um, and that was an attempt for people to say, hey, like I think what happened with run clubs, and I already think that they're like not as popular as they were
For
back
sure.
in the
Yeah.
summer. And I totally felt like that was going to happen because one, most people who are engaging in a run club initially are people who like to run. But
Yeah.
then when you add this added layer of like you're going to meet people, and like maybe it's a dating run club, maybe it's whatever, then people want to come and try the run club like once.
Exactly.
And then if you're not a runner, then like it's not the place for
Yeah.
you. And that's okay. And I think it's a really great way to potentially meet someone who has that shared interest. But I think
Mhm.
it appealed to such a wide audience of people that they were like, let me go try this once.
Mhm.
And then when they realized they like were not into running like that, they're
Yeah.
like, okay,
Mhm.
actually, never mind. And now we're in winter months,
Yeah.
and the only people who are going to really be doing run clubs are the people who liked running in the first place.
Exactly.
So it's really about like I think there's that desperation to find that third place and that community,
Mhm.
and we try and curate spaces that can work for a variety of different people and not just the runners or the gym nut or the person who like really likes to go out till 3 a.m. at a nightclub.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I definitely was following that run club train when it was happening. I'm not a runner, so I never partook. But it was very interesting to see everyone like start to hop on that train and be like, I'm about to find my man at this run club. And I was like, I support you.
Yeah, and I'm like, what did you think was gonna happen when you were like, yeah, I'm not really a runner?
Exactly, exactly. Like, what's not clicking? But here we are. But that is really beautiful. I love what you mentioned about social permission because I feel like that's something that doesn't exist when you go necessarily go out like on a night out with your girls or anything like that. Like even me thinking I have a close friend who she'll see like a cute guy but she'll never go up to him because she's like too scared to do it or like fear of rejection, things like that. And there's so many people who are like operating with that thinking in terms of dating or like even doing like content creation and like fearing being like cringy and things like that. But like that social permission, I think, is something that people should definitely keep in mind and probably just give themselves at the end of the day. Because if you're too scared to do anything, then like you're never going to get anywhere.
Totally. I mean, a lot has changed also, again, like in the last 5 years plus. Like, I would even argue in the last 10 years, a lot has changed around even the conversation with consent.
Mhm.
And I have a lot of conversations with guy friends who are like who are heterosexual and or like interested in women,
Yeah.
and they don't feel comfortable like approaching a woman at a bar. Girls
Yeah.
will go out saying, hey, like I really want to go out to a bar and meet a guy. And oftentimes it's like, okay, you might be with like a group of girlfriends, and it's very hard to approach like a group
Yeah.
of girlfriends as a guy.
Yeah.
That's number one. But number two is when you're in a setting with alcohol, and now
Yep.
we have drilled in this idea of consent, and especially with men, which is a good thing. Like this is
Yeah.
what we were asking for, and this is what should exist.
Yeah.
Is I think there's a lot of hesitation for guys in an alcoholic setting where they're like, I don't even know if this person's single, like,
Yeah.
and I don't want to offend anyone. I don't want to misstep. I don't want to do something wrong. Therefore, it's just easier for me to like hang out with my boys,
Yeah.
and like not approach women, which
Yeah.
it's like a mix of things, right? There's like
Yeah.
this desire of wanting to move into a more progressive society, but like
Yeah.
holding on to these like quote unquote traditional ideals of,
Yeah.
oh, I want to go back to what dating was. I'm like, do you? Like, I don't really think you do want to go back to what dating was.
Right.
But I think what we're asking for is like a hybrid, a new kind of dating, which is,
Yeah.
people are open to having discussions and like
Yeah.
it's sometimes as simple as taking people and putting them in a place knowing they can talk to each other and knowing that
Yeah.
they all are there for a similar reason, which might be to meet new people and maybe to
Yeah.
meet people in a romantic sense.
Yeah, exactly. And that's such a great point. I think I've had a couple conversations even with my siblings, my brothers, and like guy friends about how exactly what you just talked about, how it can be more difficult dating from a man's perspective approaching women just because of how we've come to the world today, how it is, and just how cautious you have to be of different things. So I think it's definitely important to think about how dating can look like from like a male's perspective versus like a female's perspective. You touched on this a little bit, but also wanted to ask, what do you think is the hardest thing about dating today, especially in this digital age? Like I mentioned, when we're seeing a lot of like people's Pinterest board perfect relationships and roses and cars and a lot of fake things. But in your experience, what you've witnessed and just like in your personal experience, what you think is the hardest thing about dating today?
I do think that people are really navigating different social norms.
Hmm.
And I also think that technology has changed the way that we date a lot.
Yeah.
And so, what could be challenging, and like I said, is tough, is like, and the pillar of all relationships is communication.
Yep.
And I think that we've really gotten used to maybe like either not communicating with people or just feeling like I don't know what it's like in Ohio, but in a city like New York, you feel like you have unlimited choice. Like you feel like if something doesn't work out, like you can just get back on the apps and like find somebody new. And
Hmm.
that people are maybe somewhat replaceable because of that. And you
Right.
don't try to like actually work through problems that you might have, or you don't communicate, or it could even be as simple as like you go on a first date and you're not feeling someone, but then you ghost them. And I think that a
Yeah.
lot of those things have become normalized in the last few years because
Hmm.
of technology and because of dating apps. We have the paradox of choice. Like we have
Hmm.
this illusion that there's so many people out there for us.
Hmm.
And then separately, we also have social media that plays into this idea of like, okay, well, we see people who are in perfect relationships.
Yeah.
Are they actually perfect? Like, probably not. Like, we are consuming content from all sorts of people at all times. So, like,
Hmm.
we have this barrage of information, whether it's like watching relationships that are aspirational to like dating advice, right?
Hmm.
Like people telling you, okay, well, if he's not responding to your text, this is what you should do. Or how do you get somebody to pay? Like, we're relying too much on like external factors to like
Yeah.
make decisions. I think it's really up to people to like hone in their own social skills, like get
Yeah.
outside and like actually talk to people.
Yeah. 100% agreed. I feel like TikTok is especially is like a breeding ground for a lot of crazy things. A lot of good things, but a lot of crazy things. But yeah, it's definitely easy to fall into the trap of seeing like how to get a guy to kiss you on the first date, how to get a guy in 10 days or whatever. And it's just like, can we like cancel out the noise because this is too much and it's like influencing how I show up in certain situations where I'm like not being myself and I'd rather be authentic than have all of this noise in the back of my head influencing my in-person behavior. You've hosted like so many events across the country and even in India, which is like amazing. But I know you're probably like running around doing a lot of things when you're hosting these events, but has anyone ever reached out to you and like shared like a crazy dating story from meeting at a drinks first event?
Yeah, I mean, so people ask me about success rate all the time, and I say it's so difficult because, especially at events, there's no way to track that, and like
Yeah.
success is defined in a lot of different ways. And for me, success is defined as like somebody met someone new and like connected
Exactly.
with them.
Yeah.
That's success to me.
Yeah.
But I was at an event that I was running once, and somebody came up to me and they were like, "Hey, you don't know me, but I came to one of your events over a year ago, and I brought my friend with me who was recently single, and she really didn't want to come, and she met her fiance at that event."
Oh my gosh. That
And
is
I was
incredible.
like, I had no idea who these people were. I'd never
Yeah.
seen them before in my life. They were probably at one of my events.
Yeah.
And that is the magic. Like,
Hmm.
and people are so protective over their relationships, especially like, if you're not an influencer talking to a camera about your dating life every day, like it is such a sensitive topic.
Yeah.
So there's no reason like you would be reaching out to tell me, "Oh yeah, I went on a date with someone I met," or like
Yeah.
I was hooking up with someone for like 6 months and then it didn't work out, but I met them at your event. Like
Yeah.
all of those things have happened. I
Yeah.
just like never know unless
Yeah.
somebody explicitly reaches out to me and tells me. And like we can send out surveys, we can post polls on our
Hmm.
Instagram, but like nobody wants their name kind of attached to those sorts of things. People are
Yeah.
super private about that. So like I love when people come to me and they tell me
Yeah.
like their experience with Drinks First, because more often than not it involves meeting someone new. And
Yeah.
I have also had a ton of people meet their like best friends through Drinks
Hmm.
First. If they're new to the city or they were just looking to expand friend groups, uh, it's that same idea of like-minded people in
Hmm.
one place. And so you are bound to resonate with someone eventually.
Yeah, I love that. That is so amazing to hear. And I'm sure that that's so fulfilling for you getting that feedback from people. And I, just even being a fan of your work, don't anticipate these events stopping anytime soon, which is so exciting. You give a lot of advice on dating, and I literally just saw you on the Tamron Hall show. Iconic. But wanted to turn the table on you and get a little bit of insight to your personal dating experience and how that has kind of helped you navigate dating today.
Yeah, I mean, I like I said, I'm a huge proponent of in person.
Yeah,
So I do think the best way to meet people is at things like Drinks First events or other places and spaces that you occupy with like-minded people.
yeah,
And it's really just about like talking to as many people as possible and connecting with as many people as possible. That might not always be hey, like, you and I should go on a date, but it might be like, oh, you're a really interesting person, and like maybe you would be a really good fit to meet my other friend.
hmm,
And I think people are really like loving that method of connection right now. So
yeah,
I'm like bullish on in-person things.
yup, love that. How do you, okay, I love asking my female friends about this, but how do you feel about making the first move when you see someone in person or like sliding into the DMs or things like that?
I've like never really slid into someone's DMs. I have tons of girlfriends who do it.
Hmm.
Um, and it has been really successful for them. Like,
Yeah,
I think a lot of men don't, and again, we're speaking from like a heterosexual perspective. Like,
yeah,
I think a lot of men don't necessarily anticipate like having a
hmm,
girl make the first move.
yeah,
And I arguably would say that for most men or some men, that they really like it. And if it's somebody that they would not typically go for, but you make the first move, I think you might have more of a chance. Um, a friend of mine told me, like, you just have to get used to rejection. It's a muscle that
hmm,
you have to work out. And, like, the more you get rejected, the more you don't care about rejection.
yeah,
And so, for those who are, like, really looking to date in person, like, you just gotta desensitize yourself to
yeah.
rejection and keep putting yourself out there, and hopefully eventually one will catch.
Yeah, exactly. Therapy is a real thing, and it'll definitely help you like get over the hump of like that initial fear for sure. I also wanted to ask how you've gone about determining like what you do and don't want in a partner, because I think that setting those initial like expectations from a personal level can be difficult with, a lot of input from social media, from people just around you and things like that, especially as like heterosexual women and like women of color. The dating landscape can be a bit difficult. And if you grew up in like a minority household, an immigrant household like myself, you're not necessarily talking about dating because you got to be, in the books, getting good grades, working,
100%.
all that stuff. So, how has that experience been for you in terms of setting boundaries and expectations and like things you want in a partner?
Totally. I'm also from an immigrant household. I've experienced
Period.
dating as like a woman of color. And even I never talked about dating with my family
Exactly. Yeah.
at all, ever. No, never. And then when I was like an adult and like out of college, I was like, I want to start a dating podcast. My parents were like, literally, what in the hell? Like, they're like, what do you know about anything? Also, what?
Yeah. Mhm.
Thankfully, my dad does not listen to my podcast. My mom, though, she
Oh,
listens to my podcast.
oh, yep.
And that has like opened up a lot of conversation for us. I mean, inherently, my podcast isn't about me; it's about
Right.
other people, which helps
Hmm.
in maintaining that boundary.
Yeah.
But it has opened a lot of conversation between me and my mom. And I also think that, there's this expectation of like, you don't date
Exactly.
until it's like, okay, like it's time for you to start dating. It's like,
Exactly. Like,
okay,
when
like
do
you
you?
told me not to date. Like,
Yeah.
until, like,
Exactly.
what do you want?
Yeah.
But I mean, figuring out what you want, dating is the best way to do that. Like,
Hmm.
the more people you meet and expose yourself to, it will give you a better idea of what you are interested in and what you're not. I do think that we put a lot of qualifiers on ourselves that aren't necessarily, it's what you think you want, but it's not what you actually want.
Mm.
And for example, and it's very easy for us to do this, right? Like if you're on Hinge, you can say, hey, like I only want to date people within a 3 mile radius. And they have to be between the age of 25 and 30.
Hmm.
And I would also really like if that person was college educated and if that person was over 5'10".
Yeah.
If you meet someone in person and they are 31 and live 4 miles away from you, and maybe they dropped out of college to start their own company and they are 5'9",
Yeah.
right? Like, but you can still be
Yeah.
like really interested in that kind of person.
Yeah.
So I think this idea of like qualifiers and like what you're interested in oftentimes box you in from what you might actually be looking for. And
Right.
so I think the things that are important are like, yes, I think physical is incredibly important. It's
Hmm.
what opens the door to a conversation, but it's what somebody's values and morals and goals are that should really help define your type.
Yeah.
So, oh, I really care about somebody who really values like diversity in travel. I value
Hmm.
somebody, or I really want somebody who's aligned in my lifestyle in like working really hard or is very health conscious or things like that. Those things I think are more important to defining a type and how you want to date versus like some of the more objective qualifiers.
Hmm.
And so once you have figured those things out, which I think happen with dating,
Hmm.
it makes it easier to understand the kinds of people you are looking for.
Dating, I think, just talking to people in general can allow you to learn a lot about yourself while you're simultaneously learning about other people. So, what has dating taught you about yourself, and how have you seen yourself grow through the process of dating and getting to know people?
Yeah, I mean, I think dating is like a really beautiful thing. It's like it helps you figure out how to prioritize like what you really want in someone else, and I think that's like a reflection of who you are and what your needs are.
Hmm.
Like, I learned over time that I actually really, really value somebody who's equally as ambitious as I am.
Hmm.
Like, those are things that I really want somebody in their life who cares a lot about like what they're working towards, whether
Yeah.
they're at a corporate job or they're building something or they're a musician. Like if they are really, really passionate about what they do and they have goals and they want to reach it, that is something that's important to me. And
Yeah.
that's something I learned like through dating a lot of different kinds of people. Like you can date somebody who's quote unquote really successful, maybe monetarily, but they don't love what they do.
Right.
And that's something that is not really as interesting to me as somebody who might really have a passion and be working hard towards like achieving those goals. So I
Hmm.
think dating really helps like trying to figure those things out. I also think simultaneously it helps you learn like some level of self-worth. I think especially as women of color and children of
Mm-hmm.
immigrants, like you are not necessarily, not you specifically, but like the royal we,
Mm-hmm.
like we're not especially growing up, we were not afforded being like at the forefront of media or desirability or any of those things. I think the landscape is shifting now, which is great,
Mm-hmm.
but it's through dating and through meeting people and having experiences you learn that all sorts of people have all sorts of preferences,
Right.
and like you can very much be somebody's flavor, but you would never necessarily believe that until it happens to you.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that is like so, especially for like the woman of color or the immigrant child, like who's constantly trying to achieve and wants the best for themselves. Those kinds of experiences are really valuable in like
Mm-hmm.
understanding your self-worth and knowing that okay, I deserve this like baseline level of respect, and actually I am really attractive and I
Yeah.
have a lot to offer. And
Yeah.
I think it's that mentality of like always kind of striving for more, working for more, and doing better that like can make us think otherwise.
You are definitely preaching to the choir here. I feel like when I first moved, a lot of my friends were white, and no shade, no tea, love them down. But I we often had conversations about dating, and I remember them always talking about, oh, I went on a date with this guy, didn't like him, talked to this guy, blah 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 blah, and my apps were dry, and I was like, okay, so something is wrong, like something is
Right.
not right. And over time, I mean, the dating scene here in Ohio is not the best, me for me personally. Um, but over time, as I continued to put myself out there, like you said, I just gained more confidence in like me, what I want, and all of that. And I'm realized that I'm just like the most confident I've ever been in my life, which I am so happy to say. And I want, for all women of color and just everyone in general. But I gained that through being in the trenches and crying about not going on dates, but then realizing that that's okay. And Ohio was, at the end of the day, never like my long term like home base. And it's okay if I meet someone, it's okay if I don't. But at the end of the day, I know who I am, what I bring to the table, and the amazing person that I am. And that is reassurance of itself.
Totally. Totally. And I think like it's just really important to know that there are people out there
Yeah,
who will be interested in you. You have to trust that.
exactly.
And you know, we do. It's not we do face like more issues and trouble than I think some of our white counterparts do.
Yeah,
And it's like, you know, it's not fair, but that's life.
yeah,
And you learn to navigate it. And it's
yeah,
so exactly what you said, it's so important to like gain that confidence and know what you have to offer because
yeah.
somebody will sign up for it. I promise.
Exactly, exactly. Over time, I eventually, have found those people, but it's really hard, like when you're first going through that. But hopefully, this helps people going through that.
Totally.
Um, but also wanted to ask, dating, like we said, is can be a transformative experience and teaches you a lot about yourself. But what has dating or love taught you about other people?
People are simple. Like everybody wants to be loved in every capacity, even if somebody's not ready for a relationship or whatever. Like people really crave human companionship. It is something that it has been integral to our society since the minute humans have walked this planet.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you know, there was, if there ever was, like Adam, there was also Eve. Like we inherently crave partnership. And so everybody's just out here looking for a partner. Might be multiple partners, might be like, you know, things have changed now,
Mm-hmm.
and partnership can also mean like friendship with somebody. Like these sorts of relationships are what make life go around.
Yeah,
And so that is why people have such an obsession on dating
yeah,
because it's something that every single person wants. Is companionship, partnership, and to be loved, to be known, and to be like somebody's priority.
yeah.
And so I truly think that everybody kind of just wants like similar things, and it is just important to move forth in life knowing that, and knowing that maybe you want to treat people the same way that you want to be treated. And that's it's really just that simple. Like I said at the beginning of this podcast, like love and dating is not rocket science. Like you don't need a coach to tell you or give you advice on like the smallest of things. If you zoom out, just treat people the way you want to be treated, and like hopefully that will come back to you.
Thank you so much, Ariana. To close this out, I would love like your top piece of advice for people who are nervous about dating, putting themselves out there, maybe struggling right now. What is like your top piece of advice to them?
If you're really looking to meet people, you have to put some work into it. Like, you
Mm-hmm.
can't complain about not meeting people if you're not doing anything about it. And if that means you've never been on a dating app and you want to try it, try it. Like, maybe give yourself 20 minutes a day where you are hopefully, swiping on people you might be interested in, and it amounts in a conversation. If that's not of interest to you, force yourself to do something like once a week that puts you out of your comfort zone, or try and strike up a conversation with somebody in line at a coffee shop, or say yes to going to your friend's housewarming. Do
Mm-hmm.
something that like exposes you to new people. And I this is like an advanced tip. Like if you are really really looking to meet people, one thing that I really love to do is like challenge yourself to give out your number at least once in a night. Like if you are going out for a night out with your friends, give your number out to somebody, whether that is somebody you think could be interesting to you as a friend,
Mm-hmm.
or somebody that could be interesting to you romantically. Like, try and make one connection. Once you give your number out, it's up to them to ever communicate and talk with you. But at least you know that you put yourself out there. And I think that's like a really obvious benchmark. It could even be just like, I'm challenging myself to give my number out once a week.
Mm-hmm.
And I also think number is like way more personal than giving somebody your Instagram. Like you
Yeah.
don't need another viewer to your life. Like
Yeah,
challenge yourself to actually have a conversation with someone and actually connect with them.
for
Um,
sure.
but yeah,
I love that. It's like a little side quest.
exactly.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Ariana, for being on the show. It was such a pleasure picking your brain about dating, and I hope the listeners love this episode as well. But for those looking to connect with you, where can they find you?
Yeah, I mean, one, thank you so much for having me on. This was so fun. You can find me on Instagram at ariana.nathani. My brand is called Drinks First. You can find us at drinks.first. I'm also on the Clock app. If it continues to stay, you can find me at ariana.nathani there as well. But thank you so much for having me on.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, everyone, so much for listening or watching on YouTube. You can follow Transplants at Transplants Podcast on Instagram and the Clock app if it's still there. But thank you so much for listening. And remember, you're not as alone as you think.